as of now. All right. So we are talking today about methods, processes, and approaches. And we are focusing today on both the experimental and observation as data collection tools. So, how is it that you can conduct experiments, and how is it that you can conduct observations as a means to collect data? So, um, why are we talking about this? So, choosing a method and being able to defend your choice of inquiry or your inquiry method is going to be very relevant for section 2 of your research paper. So, we started with section 1. Many of you have, written your first and second drafts of section 1. And again, it's an ongoing process, so you might even revise that second draft even more. And so I do encourage you to not think of it as a finished product, but something that you continue to go and revise as you interact with more information or as your research evolves. Sometimes, as you are in the data collection phase and the planning phase, you might actually have a change in the question that you want to look at, or you might have another question that you want to add in. And with that, you'll probably do more research to like support that. So your section 1 isn't fully complete until your whole paper is complete. But for now, we're going to move into section 2 and getting you really into like the nitty gritty of research. So, just as context and really important for you all to note is that uh, a researcher, when conducting research, must choose a method that is aligned to the purpose of their research and to the nature of the constructs that are being observed or measured. What does this mean? It means that you need to choose a method that is appropriate to your research or the design of your research in order for you to get the necessary data. You each have a question that you're looking at. Based on that question, the purpose behind your research is to answer that question. So based on the question you have, you need to choose the methods or the design of your study that is going to be in line with that. Equally important, researchers, which you are, should be able to generate or test hypotheses in either controlled situations or their testing theories in order to gather data, which will have the overall purpose of presenting a picture of a phenomenon. Now, what does that mean? Everyone doesn't have to have a hypothesis, and everyone doesn't have to do research in a controlled environment. However, you should understand what the different implications of your research choices are in order for you to be able to paint that picture of your research or to have that comprehension of a phenomenon. Okay, so do you all remember approach, method, and design? And can anyone let me know what is your research approach or what are the different research approaches? Volunteers, you can unmute your mic.
Is there one called the Explore design
So in
or
terms of
approach?
designs, explore is not in the design. It is in another of these. So is it an approach or method? But you're
Uh,
hitting something.
the design is like when you choose to do experiments or not.
Yes. So your design.
Um,
Go ahead, Mahibiti.
for the method, no, the approach, I guess it's exploratory, explanatory, or creative.
Mm-hmm.
And for the method, isn't it like the long list of the multiple methods that you can choose to do your research?
Yes and no. So methods in this category falls into the two general umbrellas of qualitative or quantitative. So in terms of your research methods, here when we're talking about approach, method, or design, the approach is whether it is exploratory, which means you're going into uncharted ground. So you're looking into something that has never been looked into before. Perhaps there is not much information available on it. It can be explanatory, in which case you are explaining the connections between two things, or you are doing further investigation to have a better understanding of a topic or a phenomenon that people know some information about already. Or it can be creative, and creative research in this sense is related to the creative field, but also this process of coming up with a solution or designing some type of product, and that being a contribution to scholarly work that is out there. And then when we look at your methods, we're looking here at qualitative research, and there are specific methods that fall under qualitative research, like phenomenologies or ethnographies, or what's a third one, like historical research or hermeneutic research. Or you have your quantitative methods. So methods that fall under those categories can be correlation studies, they can be experimental or true experimental studies. It can also be like descriptive research that is mostly based on like statistics or trend analysis, versus your designs here, where we're looking at, like Marie-Biti said, if it's experimental or non-experimental. And the difference between experimental designs and non-experimental designs is whether you are trying to test a particular hypothesis, whether you have some type of pre and post analysis that you're doing. So you do an intervention, but you want to know what people's status was before and after that intervention. And there are a couple of ways of going about these types of experiments, but you're essentially trying to prove something. And so those are the differences between approach, method, and design. We have slides on those, so I encourage you to go back. I believe those were like lesson number 3. So those are available on the Google Classroom if you want to recall those. Okay, so now that we have covered or like have a refresher of these, we're gonna today focus on this like method of quantitative versus qualitative. So quantitative research, which is not the same as quantitative methods, but quantitative research is a process that is planned, and it typically follows a linear route. So there's one step after another. This is also known as standardized research. So quantitative research is pretty standardized, and you're following one step after another. And these are the steps in standardized research. Some of these are highlighted, are bolded, so that you can see what really stands out. Um, so in terms of the different steps that you take in quantitative research, you have number 1, a selection of a research problem, systematic search of the literature, and a formulation of the research question. You do this in both quantitative as well as qualitative research. But in quantitative research, you're going to form a hypothesis. So what is your primary belief about the outcome of your study? And you're going to conduct this research in order to test this hypothesis so that it can be proved or rejected. So after your step 4 hypothesis, you have an operationalization of your study. So this is where you are putting it in place and you are carrying it out. So with that, you need to develop a project plan or a research design. You need to sample. So you can't test an experiment on the whole population, but perhaps a portion of the population. And with sampling, you want to look at different elements such as representativity. So is your sample a true representation of your target population? And there are different elements within sampling that we will look into um, in, in classes to come, or that I will have with students who specifically want to do experimental research or more specifically quantitative research. So after sampling, step number 8, you're going to choose the appropriate methods. and then access the research site. So where is it that you are collecting data? And in our days now, this can be both virtual or physical, so in person. You're then going to collect this data, document this data so you have a process for capturing it, and then analyzing the data, interpreting those results, so getting the meaning out of them, discussing the findings and their interpretations. So you are engaging critically in what these means and comparing them from one to another and adding in your perspective, which is, the argumentation that is really important. 15, you're evaluating and generalizing. So where is it that these results can be replicable, or where is it that they can be applicable to that larger population because you took a sample? And then you want to present this information. You can present it in the form of a paper, in the form of a poster, and there are other ways of presenting research data. Then this research can be used. So the results from your study can be used to develop new questions and to lead to further or future studies. This is the process of standardized research. Are there questions about standardized research?
No.
Okay,
No.
if you have questions, let me know. Don't hesitate to interrupt me as I'm speaking if you need me to clarify this. All right, so we are going to attempt to engage in quantitative research. And so I have a, short experiment that I hope we can conduct quite well. For this, we were gonna do it in person, and I was gonna have more of you all like engaged in it, but we'll all do this study. And with this, I want you to grab a piece of paper. So if you have your notebook or a piece of paper next to you, I want you to grab a piece of paper and just have it next to you. I don't want you to write anything on it. I just want to make sure that you have it for when we need it. So, does everyone have their piece of paper or what they are going to use to write on?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Let me know if you don't so that we can wait for you, because we are going to do all of this at the same time.
I don't. 1 second, please.
Okay.
Can we use the notes in our phone?
Sure, you can use the notes on your phone. Lena, are you back? Is everyone back? Do you have your piece of paper?
Yes.
Okay, great. So, um, so this is a short-term memory experiment. And with that, we are going to compare a couple of different things. So I'm gonna ask a volunteer perhaps to be my research assistant. Do any of you want to be my research assistant? No one wants to be my research assistant? Wow.
I'll be the research
I will.
assistant. Oh, okay. Go ahead, baby T.
Okay. So Maribiti, thank you for volunteering. What I need you to do as my research assistant is to develop a hypothesis. So what we are going to do is, initially I was going to ask 3 male and 3 female participants, but I'll have everybody do the study. So everyone who is present in class today will be a research participant. Again, this is totally voluntary. There are no or very minimal risk associated to this study, and the benefit of participating will allow us to determine the short-term memory of AP research students. So with that, I hope you can, you can participate in my study, and this is my informed consent process, which is not the best, but we're doing this within the context of our classroom. So I hope you will be willing to participate, and you can let me know if you have questions. All right. So thank you for confirming, Binta. So, Mahibiti, we want to look at whether there are, whether girls or boys have a better memory. Does anyone have a thought about this? Do you think girls have a better memory than boys, or do you think boys have a better memory than girls? So we have a couple of people that say girls.
Girls.
Girls? Any boys that want to say boys? Any girls that think that men remember things better? Mm.
Sixo, do you have anything to say?
Okay, so six says boys, and we have a lot of girls who say girls, and perhaps that's revealing some biases. Um, but maybe there are some girls that think that boys have better memories, or vice versa. Okay, so Marie BT, as my research assistant, I want you to come up with a hypothesis. So, what is your theory? Do you believe that girls have better short term memory than boys? Yes or no? And that could, whatever your statement is, will be your hypothesis.
Is it a yes or no question?
It's not a yes or no, but for example, let's say your hypothesis could be we want to test whether girls have a better memory than boys, but have a better short term memory than boys. So, our hypothesis is that girls have a better short term memory than boys because most of the girls in the class believe that girls or women have better memories than boys and men. That could be the hypothesis. So, do you want to write in the chat box your hypothesis as my
Okay.
okay? So, when MyBT is done writing the hypothesis, we will conduct the experiment, and then MyBT, you'll help me record the answers, and we'll do our analysis. So Hermes has an argument. He says, in football, guys can remember all the football match rules. Okay, so Mahibiti has written her hypothesis. We believe that girls have better short term memory than boys because most boys believe so. Great. So now I need you to take out that piece of paper or whatever device you're using to record. And I'm going to give you exactly 2 minutes. This is going to be timed. And Mahibiti, actually, can you put us on a timer for 2 minutes? So when we hit
Yes.
start, great. So put us on a timer for 2 minutes. And what I want you to do is just to look at the screen. So you're just gonna look at the screen and try to remember as many words as you can from what you see on your screen. Now, obviously, this is not a controlled environment. I don't want to encourage any of you to do deceptive activities. We are going to trust that for the purpose of this assignment, you're not recording anything while you are observing these words for 2 minutes, so as to not derail the study. So, Maribiti, let me know when you're ready.
I am.
All right, everybody, you have 2 minutes to look at all of these words and try to remember as many as you can. Okay,
Time is up.
thank you. Time is up. So, time is up. I hope you have remembered as many words as you can. Now, what you are going to do is you are going to write down as many words as you remember, and we'll give you about a minute to do so. So, in about 1 minute, we'll check to see how many words. Actually, a minute is a long time, but let's still do about a minute. Write down as many words as you can. Marie BT, let us know when the time is up.
Can we know how many words they were, please?
Oh, okay, let me see.
It was 25.
Thank you.
Yes, it was 25. Okay, is the minute up? I think the minute should be up. Great. Oh, okay. No. Oh my God. I wanted you all to write the numbers in the write your words in your paper. Okay. Well. And then to count the number of words that you had. Okay. So I just want the number So Lena has 8. If you are able to, just let us know the number. So Marie BT, I'm going to give you access to this spreadsheet that I have just created. And we'll be able to edit this together to make sure that we are looking at this data together. So Marie-BT, if you're able to open up this Google spreadsheet that I sent you, let's record the information from students. And we're hoping that you're honest. So I see that Lena here has 8. I'm going to assume that you all are cisgendered. So let me know privately if, okay, we'll just. Let us know if there is a. I'm going to share the screen so you'll be able to see that we are recording, and you can let us know if we are misrecording. So we're doing transparency. So I see here. Okay. All right. So we're recording the number of boys versus girls. Marie BT, you can keep recording. I'll let you do that. And then we'll do, a quick analysis. So far, what is the trend? We have 2 boys who remember 13 and 18, and 3 boys so far. And we have a total of 10 participants, right? So out of 10 participants, we'll try to see how we can.
Miss Rugi, Binta keeps going back and forth because of the internet, not purposely.
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Good thing the session is being recorded in case she needs to see something. So we have Mahi BT, are you writing Jabu? I can write Jabu. Khadija. Okay, so do we have everyone? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Great. So we have all of our 10 respondents. Do these, you can see the screen. So do these match the number of words that you gathered? So we didn't make any mistakes here. And Marie BT is still writing Aram's numbers.
She hasn't done the experiment, so
Okay, so we only have 9 students.
yeah.
Okay, so let's just move these 3 up. All right, so our experiment is very simple. We didn't do any like pre or post, and we don't have any like control group. But if we wanted to test, if we wanted to like make this a little bit more complicated, we could ask people like, actually, no, let's just do the simple analysis first. So if you all aren't really sure how to do like graphs here, we can create a simple graph that's going to give us the visual representation of our data. No, I don't want it this way. I want it. Okay. Let's combine these together. Uh-oh. I'm just not changing it. Oh wow. Oh, this is not what I wanted it to be. Why isn't it? Okay. Sorry, guys. Sometimes I get confused with Excel, but let's just make this more simple. Let's have a total column for, okay, let's do a total column for boys. So here, what do we see? We see that girls have 8, 19, 13. So total for boys is 13, 18, and 10 versus the total for girls, which is 8, 19, 10, 9, 12, 15. So then we'll do the average. And okay, so here we have that the average number of, oh, I did not do total. Sorry, guys. It can be messy sometimes. So the total number of words remembered by boys is 41, and the total number of words remembered by girls is 73. Obviously, there are more girls than there are boys. So on average, we see here that boys remembered an average of 13.6 words versus girls that answered an average of 12.16 words. So according to this short experiment, our hypothesis has been disproved because we assumed that girls would have a higher or a better memory, better short-term memory than boys because most girls believed so. Obviously, this is not a perfect experiment. There are factors that we could be more explicit about, but it's a short way of doing an experiment and getting you to see how you can test something and get results and compare two groups. One way that we could have made this more complex, for example, is having two categories of groups. So aside from it being boys versus girls, we could have chosen the same number of boys and the same number of girls so that we wouldn't have one group that is larger than the other. We could have asked one group to just look at the words and tell us what the answer was. A second category of students, we could have asked them if they believe that they have really good short-term memory, and then ask them to look at the words and then see what the results are, and to compare with the control group that wasn't asked a question versus a treatment group that was asked a question. And with that, we could choose to see whether having a belief that you have really good short-term memory affects your score or not, how well you remember things or not. So there are ways that we can make experiments a lot more complex than the one that we have now. But hopefully this gives you an idea of how some experiments can be done in really simple forms. Oh no, I want to switch the screen that I'm sharing. Are there questions about this experiment? And can we give a round of applause to Marie-Biti for being a very good research assistant? Thank you, Marie-Biti.
Thank you, Ms. Ruki.
Awesome. So let's see, let's go back. Are there questions about this experiment in particular? If you want to know more about it, I did not invent this experiment on my own. I have shamelessly borrowed it from this website, theverywellmind.com. So you can find it here, and it has a lot more information about short-term and long-term memory, and how to conduct such type of experiments. So you can look at it, and also ways that you can become better at remembering things. So, chunking is one of the ways, grouping them by categories. So if you, group them by colors and you try to remember the colors together, or group them by animals, or by theme, that can help. There are ways that we could have made this experiment more complex, but we tried to compare responses between male and female participants, and there are other ways that you can go about this. Last time I was telling you all that in previous class, I've had students conduct experiments in groups, but this year I'm more mindful of the timeline that we have and of the competing work that you have, given that our context has changed. I did not want to add this on for it to be like another thing that you have to work on, especially because working on group projects at this time when people aren't necessarily seeing each other can be challenging. So I did not want to put that on you all. But if you are interested in doing it, let me know. I'll be happy to assign, this as as a classroom activity. So definitely let me know. But yeah, so this is a website that has a lot of information on experiments, and there are other ways of conducting experiments. But let's see, this is a really good video that helps to explain different types of experiments. So are there questions before we take a look at this quick video? You might want to take some notes if you have your notebooks open. All right.
Hi, today we're going to have a look at research methods, and in particular we're going to the experimental method. This method is a research method that can establish cause and effect relationships between variables. Psychologists manipulate an independent variable to see if there is a change in the independent variable. Researchers can create hypotheses, which are predictions about the effect that changing the independent variable will have on the dependent variable. Often those in an experiment are in one of two conditions: the experimental condition, where the independent variable is manipulated, or the control condition, where no change is made. Experiments have key features that must be present. 1, the effect of the independent variables on the dependent variables is being tested. 2, controlled conditions are established, e.g. using standardized procedures. And 3, the possible replication of the procedures in order to test the reliability of the findings. Laboratory and field experiments. Experiments can be carried out under controlled laboratory conditions or in the field in a natural setting where the behavior to be studied occurs spontaneously or naturally. The choice of location reflects a balance between strict control, laboratory experiments, and ensuring that the research has high ecological validity, which is typical in field experiments. And this allows the study to be generalized to real-life settings. Experiments can be quasi-experiments, where the independent variable occurs naturally, or is already established and can't, for either ethical or practical reasons, be manipulated by the experimenter. And only the resulting behavior can be observed by the experimenter. Quasi-experiments are sometimes known as natural experiments. Here are the strengths and weaknesses of each type of experiment. So for laboratory experiments, there's a high level of control, and this helps to produce scientific research, as it ensures that extraneous variables are controlled so that the only variable affecting behavior is the one that the researchers are manipulating. Laboratory experiments are also less ecologically valid, as the research is conducted in artificial settings which do not reflect that of real life, and thus the behavior observed may be artificial. For field experiments, they offer a more realistic setting for a study and therefore have more ecological validity, but the weaknesses are that the lack of control can mean it is difficult to assume that the variable manipulated was actually influencing behavior, and that it wasn't something else, such as like other extraneous variables. For quasi-experiments, the strengths are these experiments allow us to study the effects of the variables psychologists can't manipulate or change on behavior. And for the weaknesses, there is no control over the participants in terms of social setting, how they were brought up, lifestyle, etc., which may be confounding variables which have an impact on the dependent variable. There was a quick overview in just 3 minutes. I hope you made some notes on that, and thank you for listening.
Awesome. So I hope that the video helped to just give an overview of the different types of experiments that, people can conduct.
Hi. Today we're going to have a look at research methods and in particular.
All right. So if we look at experiments and quantitative research, there is a specific purpose behind experiment or quantitative research. A lot of it is explanatory because you're looking at facts and explaining the relationships between one set of facts and another. So in terms of the experiment that we conducted, we looked at the relationship between gender and short-term memory. So we're able to collect facts and explain a little bit more on that. If we were to actually conduct this experiment into research, we might want to ask follow-up questions to understand perhaps what was the process that different students used to remember, and other questions that we can develop. Data collection in experimental and quantitative research typically involves a pre or post test, or identifies a correlation between variables. It can be through random assignment, so participants don't know what they're going to get, or controlled group, where, like the example I mentioned, if we were to add in that question beforehand, where we're asking the participants if they believe that they have, good or bad memory, then you'd be able to have a control group versus not, or through surveys. In terms of how the data is organized, this typically exists in predetermined categories and data tables. So we created a data table, and I tried to derive a graph out of that, but I was having a couple of different issues there. And then in terms of the analysis, we're being objective. So we literally are stating the facts and interpreting those. The data tends to be counted. So we use numbers, how many boys, how many girls. We looked at the average, and we used whatever the whole number of students that participated in the study. So that would be a lot, but we could have also used a sample. So initially I had designed this so that we would do 3 boys and 3 girls, and then see what that would look like. So that would have been a sample because it wouldn't be the whole class. And then we tried to find generalizable conclusions. So from this short, or limited study, can we determine that boys have better short-term memory than girls? Maybe yes, maybe no. In general, our sample is not representative enough to determine this on that scale, but perhaps we can say in AP research, students in AP research, boys have better short-term memory than girls based on the numbers that we have. Although we would want to make sure that, we were to be able to calculate everybody in the class in order to come up with that conclusion. Does that make sense to everyone? And if it doesn't, let me know.
Yes.
Okay, cool. So I have an illustrative example here. This is a paper that's written about an experiment. So I'm going to share the link and we can take a look at it. So let's take about, I don't want us to, I want us to be able to do the other activities. So let's just take a quick look at it. Let's say about 6 minutes. So the focus here is just, seeing how experiments are reported in the form of a research paper. So you should be able to click on the link here and see it. If not, I will be just sharing my screen still. But that's in case you want to look at it on your own and be able to like read it better. So this paper, who can tell me who this paper is by and what is the title of our paper here? And then I'll have a volunteer to read the abstract.
It's by Joni S. Vire, Joni S. Vire, and the title is Engaging Students Through Board Games, Measuring Its Effectiveness on Academic Performance.
Thank you. And which journal does this come from?
It comes from the International Journal of Science and Research Publications. It's the 6th volume.
Thank you. Great. So can we have another volunteer to read us the abstract here so we get a summarized version of the paper?
Can I read?
Yes, please.
Students' academic performance has various predictors. It is affected by so many factors. As the Department of Education aims to develop citizens who are holistically developed, which in a point is reflected by their academic performance. This study aimed to understand the effectiveness of engaging students through board games and on their academic performance. The research used a quasi-experimental approach. There was 44 students on the control group and 43 students on the experimental group. The total population of the two groups was used to be part of the study. Data were collected and treated using mean and t-tests to determine the difference on the academic performance of two groups. Results revealed that experimental group who was exposed to the board games have higher academic performance as reflected in their mean. Moreover, it is also evident in the findings that there is a significant difference in the academic performance of the control and experimental group. The study recommends to engage students in board games as part of improving their vocabulary bank to increase their academic performance, while considering that the vocabulary must be words that they will encounter in their future lesson.
Thank you, Sally. So great. We have an overview of this study, which looked at, the effectiveness of using board games in order to improve academic performance. So they had two groups, one which was the control group that was not given any board games and they still had to learn these words and, do a test. And the other was a treatment group that had these board games and then were able to do the test and they compared them. So here you see that, the groups are relatively the same in size. One has 44 students and the other has 43. So you're trying to look at, something that's more equal. In our experiment, we had 3 boys versus 6 girls. So the numbers aren't always the same. But we're going to skip through the introduction and the framework, and I want us to kind of look at here, there is a statement of the problem. and a hypothesis. So the statement of the problem, they want to look at three different questions. Can anyone read here what these three questions was and the hypothesis? Another volunteer, please.
Can I?
Yes, Mariviti?
What is the academic performance of the control and experimental group as reflected in their pretest? What is it? What is the academic performance of the control and experimental group as reflected in their post-test? Is there any significant difference between the academic performance of the control and experimental group? Based on the findings, what may be suggested?
Thank you. And what is the hypothesis that they had here for this study?
There is no significant difference between the academic performance of the control and experimental group.
Great. Thank you. So the hypothesis here was that there would be no significant difference in academic performance, and they had three major questions that they wanted to look at, and then based on the findings, what can be suggested. So in terms of the methodology, the group was exposed to normal classroom, the control group was exposed to normal classroom interaction, whilst the experimental group had board games while learning. They looked at the different responses. Let's see, I'm speeding through this. Okay, so in terms of the academic performance, this I believe is their academic performance before the test. Oh no. This is what happens when you're speeding through something. Okay. Results of the pretest, results of the post-test. Okay. So in terms of academic performance, let's look at the results. They did a pretest. This was their performance before, sorry. Before, their performance was relatively similar. So they were between that 75 to 78 bracket in terms of performance. And here you had relatively similar numbers in terms of male and female, so 40 and 41. So they talk about the instruments and what they were going to use to analyze. So they did a pretest, which answers question number one. What is their performance in terms of the pretest? So in terms of the pretest, the um, control group had 11.91 as a score, and the experimental group had a 12. So the experimental group had a slightly higher number than the control group, but as you can tell, the difference isn't so far. So 11.93 versus 12.3 is not a very, very big difference. So they were quite similar in terms of their pretest. So now the intervention was given, but just to one group. And here we see a major difference. The control group, which did not have any board games, had a score of 22.13 versus the experimental group, which did have board games, had a final score of 35.30. So here we see that there is a major difference in terms of the score that the students had after the intervention. So their conclusion based on the followings was that exposing students to board games does help them to learn better, and based on the findings they came up with different recommendations. The first one, that board games can be used to improve academic performance, that teachers can find more ways to improve students with innovative strategies, and that school administrators should invest in assisting teachers when they're trying to do innovative things to increase students' performance. So that was, in summary, an example of an experiment, pretty simple, pretty easy to follow, and gets you to see what quasi-experimental research can look like. Are there questions about this, comments, reflections? If you are thinking of conducting an experiment, I highly encourage you to use this as a model in terms of how the paper is presented, because it's pretty simple, pretty straightforward. You can always develop and add more information but I really thought that this paper did a good job of explaining all those different steps, and we can see how um, experiment or quantitative research in this case is standardized. Questions about this?
No.
What are your thoughts about using board games to increase performance? Do you think that this would work in your setting? Is this something that as a student you'd want to perhaps do?
I would, for years I heard that chess actually improves academic performance. So it's like not a new concept. It's a concept that's been around.
Yeah. Last year, there was a student who did want to test that out at SABS, but unfortunately, with the pandemic, it made it hard, and he ended up changing his research topic. But we were really excited about testing that out as an experiment. Okay, so I'm thinking that you're getting the gists of experiments and experimental research, and I just wanted to share a last example of experimental research. So big question. Do you all think that um, you are like in a setting where people are doing the same thing? Would you follow or would you not be influenced by the group? How many of you believe that you are influenced by your peers or groups versus not? Are people sheep? Are most people followers, or do people kind of stand their own ground and do their own thing?
Actually, it
I think it
depends.
depends.
Agreed.
It
Because
depends on
some
what.
people, because for example, if you're talking about copying, there's some, let's say, Amina, when she talks at the end, every time she says wish. And sometimes I've like, the more I hang out with her, the more I might say it afterwards. That's like, it's not, you're not influenced like intentionally, but you are.
Okay. Yeah. Can you hear me better now, Atu, and everybody else? I'm trying to speak into the mic.
Yes, we can hear you.
All right.
I feel
So
like-
perhaps, oh yes, go Lena.
I feel like people always want to say that they're not influenced by the group or anything like that, or the people around them. They don't want to be influenced, but I feel like they are, even if they don't know it.
Okay. So then, maybe most people are sheeps. Let's take a look at this quick or this short video that kind of walks us through an example.
We set up a hidden
Oh,
camera
no.
experiment.
Wait. Okay. Can you let me know if you can hear?
To answer that question, we set up a hidden camera experiment to see if this woman would stand up at the sound of this tone, simply because everyone else is. You might be thinking you'd never go along with this. Or would you? After just 3 beeps, and without knowing why she's doing it, this woman is now conforming perfectly to the group. But what happens if we take the group away?
Elaine, please.
Okay, now she's alone. The crowd is gone and nobody is watching her except our hidden cameras. What do you think she'll do? She's now conforming to the rules of the group without them even being there. Now, watch what happens when we introduce another outsider who doesn't know the rules.
Have a seat and they'll be out in just a couple minutes. Thanks so much. Everybody was doing, so I thought I was supposed to.
Think she'll teach the new guy what to do? We kept the cameras rolling as more unsuspecting patients arrived. And slowly but surely, what began as a random rule for this woman has now become the social norm for everyone in this waiting room. Here to explain what's going on in their brains is Jonah Berger of the University of Pennsylvania.
This sort of internalized form of herd behavior is part of what we call social learning. Starting at a very early age, when we see members of our group perform a task, our brains literally reward us for following in their footsteps.
When I saw everybody stand up, I felt like I needed to join them. Otherwise, I'm like excluded. Once I decided to go with it, then I felt much more comfortable.
Conformity is how we become socialized, but it can also cause us to develop bad habits or repeat past wrongs.
And it's why even this rebel, who wasn't standing for any of this nonsense, eventually joined the ranks. And the only thing more shocking than seeing how easily conformity affects the way you act is that similar forces are subconsciously shaping the way you think.
So yes, that's our little video just to give you other examples of social experiments, but also to, let us know that a lot of times people end up following others. And even when we think of our current times and social distancing or practices around COVID, we do a lot of following whatever those rules are. So if everyone is in a room wearing a mask, then we'll feel more self-conscious and need to wear a mask versus if we're in a setting where people aren't wearing masks, in which case you might not want to be the odd person and not wear your mask. I know that a lot of people probably feel guilty about this, but that's just an example that I have noticed just in general. But social experiments as a form of collecting data and as a type of research can be really engaging, can be really fun. And so for those of you who are going to be doing experimental research, you have a lot of options. Yeah. Okay, so that was an example. And I used to have students do, experiments, but we'll scratch that out for this year. Okay.
To answer that question,
okay, cool. So moving gears, we have about 20 minutes or so left for class. Let's see. Let's move into qualitative research. So are there questions about social experiments? I see the chat group is kind of going, okay, good. You can comment about social experiments and whether we're all sheep or not, but I think we all are sheep. We kind of tend to do what everybody does. Okay, so qualitative research, also known as non-standardized research, as opposed to standardized research. So for those of you who were here at the beginning of class when we started, we looked at all those different steps in standardized research. But in qualitative research, the process is a little less linear. So some of the steps are more closely linked, while others might not be there, or they might be at different stages in the process. And what does that look like? This is what it looks like. So in terms of the steps in non-standardized research, you have similar steps without the ones that were bolded in the first one. So you're going from a research problem, you're still searching the literature, you're still formulating a research question and developing a plan. You're selecting appropriate methods, which is the step at which you guys are now. So you all are at step 5. You're accessing the research site. And again, we talked about how this could be virtual versus in person. You are also sampling data, documenting this data, analyzing this data, perhaps doing some comparisons. You are discussing these findings and their interpretations, so getting meaning out of them. You're evaluating and generalizing them, presenting these results or presenting the study in paper or poster or presentation format. And this is information that can be used to develop new questions and to engage in future or further research. So these steps, you kind of are doing this over and over again, and they're not all that linear. So some people are doing some steps at the same time as they're doing other steps. And, it can be a little less standardized or linear than standardized research. Okay, so the purpose behind qualitative research is generally to explore and to find insights into particular contexts. So you're getting a lot more detailed information of a particular topic or a phenomenon. The data collection is commonly in the form of focus groups where you're discussing with numbers of people, in-depth interviews, so you are interacting a lot more with perhaps one person, uninterrupted observations, bulletin boards or ethnographic participation or observation. In this type of data collection, you're typically describing events or you're describing facts, so it's textual, and it tends to focus on a particular case or cases. In terms of how the data is organized in qualitative research, it's open and flexible, so you can have the data and then have your categories emerge as a result, versus in quantitative research where those categories are determined already. And in terms of the analysis of this type of research, you are focusing on themes and the meanings or interpretations. So coding or categorizing Likert scales, from to what extent. So people are agreeing or disagreeing, or how low or how high. You kind of go from one to another in order to derive, the meaning behind the data that you have. So these are some of the key differences between your quantitative or experimental research versus your qualitative research. And in terms of comparing these, the ways that we collect data in quantitative research, it tends to be in the form of surveys or questionnaire, where you're collecting a lot of numerical or counted data. Laboratory experiments, or it can be non-laboratory experiments, such as quasi-experiments, like the example that we looked at, or experiments like the one that we conducted, this mini experiment. Or it can be intervention strategies with a pre and a protest. In terms of qualitative research methods, perhaps you're looking at interviews and focus groups and observations, or more specifically using like case study research or ethnography as a form of collecting data. So those are some of the differences between the two. And many people end up doing some form of mixed methods data collection, where they might combine surveys as well as interviews or focus groups. So it really just depends on you guys. Let's take a quick look at observations, and then we'll be able to test this out. All right, 1 second. All righty.
Hi guys, today we're going to be looking at observations, and this is for the OCR A2 Psychology spec. Observations. So observational methods can be used as a method in themselves. Milgram, for example, conducted a controlled observation in his study on obedience. They can also be used as ways of gathering data, e.g. Bandura. Naturalistic observation. This is an observation which is carried out in the field. This gives researchers the opportunity to observe natural behavior. Controlled observations. A controlled observation ensures that all the possible factors which might alter the behavior and which could therefore confound the findings are controlled. Such observations occur when observational research is carried out under carefully arranged conditions. Participant observation. This is where the researchers are part of or or are pretending to be part of the group they are observing. Non-participant observation. This is where the researcher is not part of the group being studied or isn't playing the part of another person in the group. Unstructured and structured observations. Unstructured observation, this is where the researcher continuously records and reports on behavior, noting everything that happens. Structured observation. This is where the researcher imposes a structure on their observation to meet the aim of their investigation. They devise observational systems such as category checklists and coding frames to record data. Covert observation. This is where the participant, the person being observed, does not know that he or she is being observed. Overt observation. This is where the participant knows that he or she is being observed and has either given their consent or is aware of being observed because of the observer's presence. So I'm going to go through the strengths and weaknesses of each type of observation. So first of all, naturalistic observations. The strengths of this are that you may see normal realistic behavior, and the weaknesses are that lack of control means there could be other factors influencing the behavior. For controlled observations, the strengths are that it controls other variables which might impact behavior. And the weaknesses are that it is artificial and therefore lack ecological validity. The strengths of a participant observation are that the observer has a good vantage point for their observations, and the weaknesses are that the observer's presence may change the course of events they're observing, particularly if it is overt. You may become too involved in the group to really be objective with your observations. Non-participant observation. This allows you to remain more objective about what is being observed, but you may not gain the same level of insight as you would in a participant observation. Structured. This allows for comparisons to be made across each observation and for trends in the data to be easily identified. However, this means that potentially some important behaviors may be missed. Unstructured observation. There might be too much going on and too many things to record that the observation isn't successful. The data gathered may be too dense and too detailed to reveal anything. The data may be difficult to analyze and compare. Covert. Natural behavior can be observed, especially if it's in the field, and this is uncontaminated by subject reactivity. The participant may not display their natural behavior if they become aware of being observed. Overt. Allows consent to be obtained, which is ideal in terms of ethics. However, the findings may be affected by subject reactivity as they know they are being observed.
Great. So I hope you all were able to take some notes. And just as an overview, there were 8 different types of observations that were shared in this lecture. Do any of you remember them? What were some of the different observations mentioned?
They were
Nature.
naturalistic.
So we had
They were naturalistic, population, non-population, overt. That's the only one I remember.
Okay, so before looking at this video, were you aware that there were so many different types of observations?
No.
Perhaps not as many, right? And we use our eyes, for those of us who can see, we use our eyes every day to collect data on everything that we're doing, from like in order to inform the decisions that we make, or in order to make certain choices. We observe and we're gathering data and we're collecting data, and our brains are analyzing this on the spot. And in terms of research, there are many ways that you can observe. So some of the main ones were naturalistic versus controlled. So are you observing something that is happening naturally, or are you observing something in a controlled environment? There was participant versus non-participant observation. This is often used in ethnographies. So participant observation, where you are doing the same thing as the people you're observing. So if you were to go like fishing and you wanted to understand fishermen's experience at sea, then you would be observing them while fishing with them, versus being a non-participant observer where you're just observing them and you're not doing it. It could be like if you wanted to observe how children play soccer on the street, you know, you could sit on the corner and just look at them versus actually playing with them, and you're still observing. A couple of the other ones were structured versus unstructured observation, where in structured observation, you're looking for specific things. So perhaps you have a check mark where you are, noting for, let's say you're walking into a classroom and you want to make sure that all the chairs are, tucked under the desks. You have a list of things you're looking at versus unstructured where, you might just be looking around for anything. And then covert versus overt observation, where covert you're hidden, so people don't know that you're observing them, and overt where you are, out in the light and people know that you are observing them. So these are the different ways that observation is used as a form of data collection. And we are going to do a little bit of observation. So class ends at 3:10, if I'm not mistaken. I want you all to take the last, we'll shorten it, let's say the last 7 minutes, and do some observation in your home or outside, so in your neighborhood. So you'll explore, your house, maybe another room in your house. Maybe you're observing people doing something like in the kitchen or whatever it is, it's your choice. Or you're going outside of your house and in your neighborhood, not far. You only have 7 minutes. We're cutting this a bit short. And then I want you to think about what is it that you have chosen to observe, and perhaps what are the questions that emerge out of it. So let's say I was observing my niece and nephew out here who are making a lot of noise today. Then maybe I'll have questions like, what is motivating their sounds? Or I don't know, maybe perhaps what is the impact of what they're watching influencing their behavior? I might come up with a lot of questions. So I want you to just go out, explore, and come up with some questions based on what you have been able to see. And we will reconvene at 7 minutes past 3. How does that sound?
Good.
Okay, so go ahead, observe, and then come back with your observations so you can write notes and let us know what your questions were. Thank you. Okay, we have Amina who's back. Let us know if you're or when you're back. So Amina, were you able to take some notes of what you observed?
Not physically, but mentally.
Okay, maybe while we're
Does
waiting for
that
others,
work?
you can write your notes down.
Okay.
You can write things like the context, so the who, what, when, where, why, and then perhaps if there was any questions that emerged based off of your observation.
I was able to take some notes on my observations. Yeah, I got it. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Christina. So if you're back, let me know. And hopefully you were able to get some notes based off of your observations. So thank you. Atu is back. We have Jabu's back. So were you all able to take some notes?
Yes.
Not really, because I was held down by my stepfather who was with me.
It happens. So I had really planned for this to, for us to go out in Point E and give students like 15 minutes to be able to explore and take observations. So maybe when we're back in person, we can still do it and have it be a little bit more structured. But I know class is ending soon, so I want us to go over this last thing. So typically, I have students fill out this ethnographic field note, and they are able to jot down specific information. So you are able to note down things like the title, well, it would just be exploring your neighborhood or your home, the date, the names of the observer, perhaps at what time you observed, what time you ended, and informations about the location and whatnot. So here you would describe the activity. So I, in my observation time, looked at my niece and nephew, but I would love to hear what you all observed. So do we have any volunteers to share what their observation was about? Ooh, Jabu has written in the text. Would anyone like to go out loud, and then I'll be happy to read Jabu's observations.
Can I?
We were just watching customs.
Oh, Binta can go first.
Binta and then Lena.
Okay, so I observed my sister. She was doing her homework, and the questions I asked were, she said that her homework was due Monday. And so I asked, why is she doing her homework now when it's due Monday? And then I also asked, why is she doing her physics homework when she has English homework due before Monday? And then I asked, does she prefer physics, and does she plan on doing her English homework?
Okay, thank you, Binta. So you actually engaged in two different methods, right? So you observed, you watched her as she did her homework, and you also engaged her in conversation. But perhaps, before you went up to her and asked her, there was that question of what homework is she doing? And so sometimes when we are just observing, we're not engaging necessarily in asking questions, but maybe you are doing a participant observation. So you weren't doing her homework with her, but you were engaging her in conversation and still noting what she was doing. So thank you, Binta, for sharing that experience. Lena, can you go next?
Yes. So I observed my sister, and I just asked a few random questions just about what she was doing. I said, why is she so short? That was just my first thought when I was looking at her. Why is she playing with jewelry? Does she not have any schoolwork to do? And then she stopped playing with the jewelry. So I asked, what is she watching on her phone? And then I asked, why is she wearing headphones?
Nice. Great. So how many of you were able to do this activity and not ask the person you were observing any questions? Were any of you just silent observers?
Me.
Okay, Atu, and Khadija.
Me
Awesome.
Me too.
So I'll read
I
it.
was actually observing a person,
Oh, what were you observing?
airplane.
Okay, nice. Did questions come out of that?
Yeah, where where it was going.
Where it was going. Yeah. Thanks, Sally. So I'll just read out what Jabu wrote. She said she observed her little brother playing basketball. He plays basketball a lot and he always plays basketball like he was on the court. So her questions were, is he mimicking his favorite basketball player move? Is he aware that he's playing without a ball? So he's playing air ball. Wow. Is he trying to improve his game approach? Yes, Jabu. So a lot of questions can emerge based off of your observations. And if any of you are including observation in one of those data collection tools that you have, it can help to direct your future research. And so if you were to be doing your research, I know some of you, for example, Amina is looking at how religion influences decision making. Then she might want to observe people and, you know, is there in instances where people are making decisions, are they being influenced by their religion or not? This might not be something she's able to tell directly, but you know, maybe in other instances, she can follow someone around and observe them as they're making their decisions and, you know, maybe ask them questions about how much did religion influence on that. Or someone else, let's see who else is around that has an easy example to give. Okay, I am seeing Jabu. So Jabu is looking at, you know, creativity in adolescence. So she might want to observe adolescents or teens and determine, are there instances where, you know, spouts of creativity or elements of creativity spark out during a particular like activity. Let's say she's looking at people and they have an assignment to do like a wall painting or they have to solve a problem. Maybe she's going to be able to pick up on a couple of different elements. So observations can be really cool ways of collecting data. It can be structured or unstructured, like, you know, the video explained, and there are ways that we can go about this. I would love for us to be able to do an observation in person. So hopefully next time we have class at school, we'll be able to take, you know, 10, 15 minutes at it out of that time to be able to do it. I'll read Khadija's little description before we end class, and I'll be sharing your grades with you individually. So Khadija says that within the 5 minutes that she was able to observe, 22 people crossed the street going to the road and the sea, while only one person crossed the street going towards her home, so in the other direction. The experiment has been done on Wednesday from 3 to 3:05 p.m. in the middle of a pandemic. Does that mean that her home is located in an isolated street? Did the time or the context of the position of her home affect the results? These are all questions that emerged from her little observation. So thank you, Khadija, and thank you to everyone who shared what they got out of their observations. Are there questions related to this? We didn't do the interviews, but we kind of wrapped this up together. So let me know, do you have questions? How many of you think you might want to add observation? Or how many of you think you might want to find a way to work an experiment into your research? Do you have a change of heart now that you have learned a little bit more about experiments and observations? Maybe you don't, and that's also fine. All right, well, if no one has any comments or questions, I'm going to stop sharing and let's see. So I know you all are waiting for your grades.
Miss Hogi,
Uh-huh.
for our draft 2, did you look at it?
I didn't get a chance to look at it. I know you all submitted it last night and some even before, and a few have asked for extensions. So I will be taking a look at it. But what we do at the end of this week is your research plan. And I really want you all to like be as detailed and as specific as possible. So there is that is available on the Google Classroom. Let's see if I can find it. There's a template that is oh, what am I doing? Oh, okay. There's a template that's available in the Google Classroom. Let's see, how do I get to it? And you should be able to fill that template out directly and be able to be as specific as you can about your plan. So I have added a link here on different data collection techniques that you can look at. And it'll explain pretty well some of these. So there are 3 sections, just an overview of what you've learned, details about who do you need to collect data from, how will you collect this data, where will you get this data, when will you get this data, what do you need, why, and then what are perhaps some challenges you think you might face. And we'll be talking about doing in-person versus virtual data because this is an important part of our current context. And research can still be very successful even at a distance. A lot of surveys are conducted online, and interviews can also be done via Zoom. You can even do focus groups via Zoom. So there are many ways that we can still, within the context that we're in, be able to conduct research. Does that answer your question, Jabu? I didn't get a chance to look at the second drafts.
Yes, it does.
Do. Okay. Let's see. I'm gonna stop recording and stop sharing unless there are other questions or comments.
No.
Okay.
No.
Cool. Good. Stop recording.